we see a hand. Just a hand. The fingers are covered in calluses, thick, cracked skin, hardened by years of friction against leather and metal. On the stone table before him sits a piece of dark bread. Dense, almost black. The crust so hard the man needs both hands to break it. He does it without rushing, without ceremony. Like someone who does this every day. Because he does. This man is a knight. Not the knight from illuminated manuscripts, that resplendent being mounted on a white stallion, wielding a golden lance beneath banners snapping in the wind. This is the real knight. The one who rises before dawn. The one who straps 30 pounds of steel to his body before he even mounts his horse. The one who needs to fight for hours, ride for days, and do all of it on whatever fuel the land and war can offer. And what the land and war offered looked nothing like what centuries of imagination have led us to believe. For generations, the figure of the medieval knight has been wrapped in glamour. Films, novels, video games. All repeat the same image. Lavish feasts, tables overflowing with roasted meat, goblets of wine brimming in torch-lit halls. Chivalry as a symbol not just of military power, but of abundance and refinement. Science, however, does not feed on myths. Over the past few decades, archaeologists, food historians, and medieval medicine specialists have assembled a body of evidence that tells a radically different story. Isotopic analyses of skeletons recovered from European battlefields. Accounting records from military campaigns preserved in monasteries across France and England. Arabic medical treatises translated into Latin and used in European courts. Cookery manuscripts dated between the 12th and 15th centuries. What these documents reveal is not just fascinating. In many ways, it is stunning. To understand what a knight ate, we first need to understand what a knight was, and what his body needed to endure. A fully armed man in the 13th century carried between 55 and 88 pounds of equipment. The hauberk alone, an interlocked iron mesh covering the body from neck to knee, weighed between 33 and 44 pounds on its own. Over it, the breastplate, the leg greaves, the helm, the steel gauntlets, and the sword. A long combat sword could weigh between 2 and 4 pounds, while the shield added another 10 to 13. Moving under that weight was already a considerable effort. Fighting under it for hours beneath the August sun on some field in Burgundy or the Holy Land was an extraordinary physiological feat. Every blow struck, every mounted charge, every fall and rise demanded muscles that needed to be constantly fueled. The problem is that medieval logistics were brutal. A 12th century military campaign could last months. Armies moved slowly, between 12 and 18 miles a day under favorable conditions. Supply depended on 3 sources: what the men carried with them, what they found along the way, and what they could pillage. In enemy territory, the third option was most common. In friendly territory, the second. This means that a knight's diet on campaign was not decided by a court chef. It was decided by geography. The accounting records of the Crusades, particularly documents preserved in the archives of the Order of Hospitallers in Malta, show with unsettling precision what was purchased to feed military contingents on the march. Wheat, barley, dried legumes, peas, lentils, broad beans, salt pork, dried or smoked fish, olive oil, vinegar, wine, yes, but not for pleasure. Watered-down wine was, in practice, the safest drink available. Fermentation eliminated most of the pathogens present in water, drawn from unknown springs and rivers. A knight who drank untreated water in foreign territory ran a serious risk of dying from dysentery before ever seeing a battlefield. Bread was the absolute cornerstone of the diet. Not the soft white bread of romantic depictions. That was the privilege of the highest nobility. The knight's bread on campaign was hardtack, called biscuit in medieval England. Twice baked, hard as stone, capable of lasting weeks without spoiling. To eat it without breaking your teeth, You soaked it in broth, in wine, or simply waited for the ambient moisture to soften it. It was not elegant, it was functional. And here the first great myth begins to crumble. The idea that knights sustained themselves primarily on meat, nitrogen isotope analyses of medieval bones, a technique that allows researchers to reconstruct an individual's diet based on the chemical composition of their skeleton, consistently show that even among the warrior elite, animal proteins represented a smaller fraction of the diet than previously imagined. The majority of calories came from grains, then legumes. Meat appeared, but it did not dominate. This does not mean meat was absent. It means it was seasonal, irregular, and frequently of far lower quality than the fictional feasts suggest. On campaign, a knight ate what was available. And what was available, more often than not, was salt pork or dried fish, not the roasted boar on a spit that lives in the collective imagination. If this kind of history blows your mind, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this content reach more people who love the real story behind the legends. There is one particularly revealing document, the Ménagier de Paris, a household manual written around 1393 by a Parisian burgher for his young wife. While not a military manual, it offers a precise window into what affluent people, not necessarily the highest nobility, but certainly the urban elite, ate on a daily basis. What emerges is a surprisingly varied diet in terms of vegetables, herbs, and grains, with meat present but far from dominant. For knights of military orders, the Templars, the Hospitallers, the Teutonic Knights, the diet was even more strictly regulated. The rule of the Knights Templar, drafted in 1129 under the influence of Bernard of Clairvaux, specified with precision what knights could and could not eat. Meat was permitted only 3 times a week. On the remaining days, fish, eggs, legumes, and bread. Fridays were strict fast days. This is crucial. The most feared warriors in medieval Europe, the men who formed the military backbone of the Crusades, followed a diet that today we would call, without exaggeration, predominantly plant-based for most of the week. The question that naturally follows is, how was this even possible? How did men carrying the weight of full armor and fighting in engagements that could last for hours sustain themselves on bread, lentils, and dried fish? The answer lies in 2 frequently underestimated factors: quantity and preparation. Medieval rations were substantial. A man engaged in intense physical activity consumed between 3,000 and 4,000 calories per day, and military supply records suggest that logistical planning accounted for this. A knight on the march received roughly 2 pounds of bread per day, along with generous portions of legumes and, when available, animal fat in the form of salt pork. The total caloric value was adequate. The issue was not quantity, but nutritional quality during extended campaigns. Preparation was also far more sophisticated than the image of a warrior eating straight from an open fire suggests. Medieval military camps had professional cooks. English court documents from the 14th century record payments to cooks who accompanied armies on campaign. They prepared pottages, thick soups of legumes, vegetables, and bones that concentrated nutrients and were easy to consume even for exhausted men. Spiced hot wine, known as hippocras, appears in campaign records not as a luxury, but as preventive medicine. Spices such as ginger, cinnamon, and clove were added for their preservative properties, and as was believed at the time, for their ability to warm the blood and strengthen the warrior. Medieval humoral medicine had its own logic, and some of it, for reasons those physicians could not have understood, actually worked. And here, we arrive at an element that rarely surfaces in narratives about medieval knights: nutritional awareness. The medical treatises available in medieval Europe, many of them translations of Arabic works, particularly those of Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna, discussed at length the relationship between diet and physical performance. Avicenna's Canon of Medicine, translated into Latin in the 12th century, circulated in European courts and was consulted by physicians attending the warrior nobility. In it, there are specific recommendations about foods that strengthen the muscles, foods that weigh down the stomach before combat, and foods that restore strength after exertion. Eating before a battle was a science. Or it tried to be. Crusade records mention knights who refused heavy meat on the morning of a battle, preferring bread with honey and watered wine, a combination of fast-absorbing carbohydrates that, from a modern physiological standpoint, makes perfect sense. Not because they understood anything about muscle glycogen, but because generations of warriors had learned, through the brutal experience of battles lost by sluggish, heavy men, that a full stomach was an enemy on the battlefield. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. It's always incredible to see people from so many different places discovering these buried stories together. The transition from the 13th to the 14th century brought significant changes not only to armor, which evolved progressively from chain mail to full plate, but also to the dietary patterns of European chivalry. The development of plate armor, which reached its technical peak between 1350 and 1450, created an even heavier warrior, even more dependent on physical endurance. A knight fully encased in late medieval plate armor, such as those produced in the workshops of Milan, then the world center of armor manufacturing, could carry between 77 and 99 pounds of steel. Moving in that armor demanded not just strength, but a specific musculature developed over years of training that began in childhood. The skeletons of medieval knights exhumed in archaeological studies show characteristic bone asymmetries. The right arm consistently more developed than the left, the spine with specific wear patterns in the lumbar vertebrae, leg bones with density well above the population average. These bodies were deliberately engineered machines, and machines require adequate fuel. It is in this period, the 14th century, that the first records emerge of something we might call a training diet for knights. Not yet with modern systematization, but with a growing awareness that what a squire ate during his formative years directly influenced the warrior he would become. The chivalric treatises of the period, particularly Ramon Lull's Book of the Order of Chivalry, written around 1275, and the later Book of Chivalry by Geoffroy de Charny, from the mid-14th century, mention briefly but revealingly the importance of dietary restraint. Charny, considered the most virtuous knight of his time by the King of France himself, writes about the danger of gluttony, not merely as moral failing, but as a physical weakness that compromised performance in combat. Restraint, in this context, was not just virtue, it was a survival strategy. Because in the end, this entire story about dark bread, lentils, and dried fish is not about what medieval knights preferred to eat. It is about what they needed to eat to survive, to function, to remain standing under 30 pounds of steel on a battlefield hundreds of miles from home for days or weeks on end. And here is the reflection this story leaves us with. We live in an era of abundance without precedent in human history, and yet we still wage daily battles with our own relationship to food. We still ask ourselves what to eat, how much to eat, when to eat. We still build myths around perfect diets, just as the Middle Ages built myths around feasts that never existed the way we imagine them. The medieval knight, with his hard bread and his lentil soup, had no illusions about his diet. He ate what was there. He ate to keep going. And in that radical simplicity, eating to function, not to fantasize, there is a lesson that crosses 8 centuries without losing an ounce of relevance. The camera returns to the stone table. The dark bread, the calloused hand. The knight finishes his meal, wipes his hands on his tunic, and stands. Outside, the sound of metal. The day begins. This narrative combines documented historical facts with dramatized elements for educational purposes. All visual reconstructions were created using artificial intelligence. Information regarding medieval diet is based on archaeological research, isotopic analyses, and historical documents, including records from the military orders, medieval chivalric and medical treatises, and studies published by historians specializing in medieval food history.